Hello, my name is Abby Randall, and I'm a licensed professional counselor that specializes in working with individuals who've experienced trauma through things like sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. And I'm here to talk to you today about what to do after you have had an unwanted sexual experience. I think that it can be helpful to first identify what is the difference between healthy sexuality and unhealthy sexuality. What are the red flags that are associated with unhealthy sexuality, and how do I go about identifying what exactly happened in the situation that contributed to it feeling unwanted. So I'm going to start by talking about healthy sexuality, which always involves consent. And what I mean by that is that both parties are in agreement and they are in open communication. In healthy sexuality, there's always honesty, there is trust, there is a sense of safety in the relationship, there is respect related to each other's independence and autonomy, each individual's ability to make their own decisions. There is shared decision making, there's open communication around things like boundaries. There is no imbalance in power. And I would say that healthy sexual behavior, it agrees with a person's values, and it does not cause them or force them to compromise in those values. Now, unhealthy sexuality, on the other hand, I would say that it does not communicate through or respect boundaries or values, but instead it compromises values and it dismisses boundaries. It is non-consensual, which means that both parties are not in agreement, not in communication. There's often coercion that is involved, which means the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. Unhealthy sexuality, it often feels unsafe. And there's often one person that is powering over another person. Now, some red flags that are associated with unhealthy sexuality that I just want to bring your attention to are these. So when sex begins to feel riddled with shame, when you are beginning to feel pressure to compromise your values or the boundaries that you have, when there is use of coercion and intimidation and threats, when there's a sense of obligation and guilt that is involved, these are all red flags. When you are feeling objectified, or maybe there's a part of you that is feeling used. When there's emotional abuse that is present, which can involve things like isolation or minimizing or denying your experience, maybe even blaming you for the parts of your experience that felt unwanted or that you did not like. When sex is a condition for love or when it is devoid of love, that's another big red flag to be aware of, as well as when sex is void of communication. When parts of you feel shut off or compromised, when it feels like sex is only benefiting one person and, when one person is powering over the other, when there's this sense of no limits or boundaries, or when it feels out of your control or uncontrollable or impulsive or compulsive, these are all indicators of unhealthy sexuality. And so at this point in the video, there might be some of you that are listening in that are really resonating with some of the things that I have shared about unhealthy sexuality and red flags associated with unhealthy sexuality. And I just want to take a pause and I want to say to you that you are not alone, and that there are people that want to come around you and empower you in your journey forward towards healing. There are people that want to support you through this. And I just want to begin that process of empowering you through giving you a few tips today on what to do after you have had an unwanted sexual experience. So first of all, I want to encourage you to tell someone that you trust about the experience that you had. You might be experiencing mixed feelings, emotions, thoughts about what exactly happened. Maybe those mixed feelings and thoughts involve you asking yourself, well, what part did I have to play in it? And was it really abusive? And was it not? And that's a very common experience after having an unwanted sexual encounter, to experience confusion and shame and to kind of get in that space of negative self-talk. And so regardless of where you're at in processing the experience, I want to encourage you to tell someone that you trust. Second, I want to encourage you to work with a therapist who is trauma-informed, who has a grid for sexual trauma and has experience working with individuals who have experienced sexual trauma. I also want to encourage you to, be picky with the therapists that you choose to work with. And what I mean by that is really make sure that you feel safe with that therapist, that you feel connected to that therapist, that you feel freedom to share, from the depths of your heart, because this is a really intimate, and vulnerable thing to be talking about. Sexuality is something that, in order to talk about it, there needs to be safety that is there. So it's super important to find a therapist that you feel that with. Third, I want to encourage you to start writing up and brainstorming a prevention plan that can help you to stay safe and reduce the risk of having experiences like this again in the future. And so some things that I want to encourage you to include in the safety plan are this. So I want you to first just take some time to reflect on the unwanted sexual experience that you had. And I want you to identify and write down, what were some of the red flags? What were some of the indicators that this was an unsafe situation? Maybe it's red flags that you dismissed or you ignored at the time, but go ahead and write those down. And then I also want you to write down on the opposite end of things, like what would be green flags then? What would be indicators that this person is safe, that this is a safe relationship, a safe place? And then I really want to encourage you to integrate your support network into your prevention plan. And one idea that I want to give to you is to have a code word, that you share with somebody that you trust when you may possibly find yourself in another situation that could be potentially harmful, where you can text that safe person, that person that you trust, that code word, or you can call them up and you could say that code word to just kind of indicate to them, to make them aware that you need help getting out of this situation. I also want to encourage you to prepare an excuse or a little speech, that you can use should you find yourself in a potentially harmful situation again and need to exit out of that. The fourth thing that I want to encourage you to do is to come up with a solid self-care plan. Oftentimes after sexual abuse or unwanted sexual experiences, it can be really common to feel shame, to feel guilt, to feel confusion, and all of those things can really keep us from taking care of ourselves and from loving ourselves and from really giving ourselves the space to heal and to move forward into freedom. So I want to encourage you in your self-care plan to be just thinking of, what are those physical health related things? What are some emotional health, relational, spiritual, mental health related things that you can integrate into that self-care plan? And so those are just a few tips that I have for you. I hope that this information and that these tips were helpful to you, that you feel empowered to take your next step towards healing and freedom. Thank you so much for tuning in.